Well, welcome to Journey Church. My name is Jamie. I'm one of the pastors here. I'm not a Pharisee this week. If you were with us last week, we've been in this series called The Storyteller. Before we jump in, though, I got some great news for you. In order to set up the news, I need to tell you this. If you're relatively new to Journey, just a little bit of our backstory. My wife and I and our family, we planted Journey about 13 years ago. And we met in our home, kind of had our first gathering with 14 people. Eventually, we moved over to Dave Ramsey's building, and we started there. Then we moved to the factory. We merged with another church. We were there for 10 years. We moved to this space about a year and a half ago. And again, if you're new to us, we're right in the middle of an expansion. So we knew this property was pretty non-functional when we got here, but there were 10 acres, and so we knew there was some space. And so off we go. Even this first kind of phase one of our expansion is a bit of a Band-Aid, but it will at least get us from here to there, and it gave us a chance to start a preschool, which we knew would serve this community, and that was a big deal for us. But one of the things we have loved since the beginning, in the early days of our church, is just always look for ways to embrace the arts. We felt like kind of post-Enlightenment, the church started to abandon the arts, other than perhaps music. It just seemed like we'd forgotten about them, and the failure to understand that imagery is just as powerful as words, perhaps at times even more powerful. And so how do we help people hear the love story of Jesus through imagery? And so along with the arts, one of our favorite things to do is just empower people and raise up, especially young people, but anybody who's just got a dream, a vision. They want to somehow carry the love story in their own unique way. One of the ways that happened for us for years, still is, through church planting. So our first 10 years, we planted like 10 churches, and which, by the way, created a little bit of a challenge sometimes because some of them were our pastors and our elders and people from our church going off to plant, which was amazing, but you got to replace that. But it was just to watch other people and empower them to the calling in their lives. And others been through music, bands that have kind of grown up or come out of this congregation and taken their stories to the world. Recently, about a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago now, Brett Mabry and Mark Papatic got involved in a film that came out of Hollywood, and our church got involved in that. And the digital storytelling part through photography and film has really kind of burgeoned in the last couple of years. We have several production houses here and a couple of bands in particular. Joel's here. He had a film called Priceless. Bart had a film called I Can Only Imagine. And just films that were just starting to go out. And we're going, man, how do we keep this momentum going? How do we continue to help raise up the next 1,000 storytellers? Because, you got to learn how to tell stories somewhere. And unfortunately, not a lot of places. You go to Atlanta, you go to Hollywood, and sometimes that pathway is a pretty painful pathway. So is there anything we can do when it comes to storytelling? So for the last year and a half, I teamed up with a guy named Randy Brewer, who owns Revolution Pictures. And we've been doing stories together for about 10 years. But for the last 15 months, we've been working on trying to create a film school. And it went live this week. So there it is right there. There's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears behind that. But I'll just say a word about it. I don't have enough time to really climb into it, but just a quick word. Randy's here. He's going to be in the lobby if you're interested. But there are a couple of things about this that make it unique. Number one, it's like a 3-month semester. So if you know a kid that's looking for a gap year out of high school and you go, this kid's is really talented. Funny thing about kids is they actually hold their phones. A lot of them have already learned how to edit, film, take pictures. What do you think about these millennials? The other thing about millennials is some of them are like, hey, I don't know if I want to graduate with $80,000 in debt because I had to take the history of Western civilization and Algebra 1. So part of this was going, is there a way to actually innovate education in America? So we've tried to kind of fuse both ideas. How do we raise up storytellers, but also do so in an immersive and apprenticeship style as opposed to traditional academia? I was a professor before we planted, so I got a little bit of that academic in me. But what we've done is tried to fuse these things together. So in January, we're actually going to have our first class. It's limited, but I'm looking forward to it. I get to go back to being a professor again. They're night classes, so you could be a mom who goes, hey, I just put my kids in preschool, and I just want to get back into creativity again. You could go, hey, I'm in business. I want to tell the love story of Jesus, but I need to refine my storytelling craft. So it's really developing that craft, but in the context of the cinematic arts. So if you love film in any way or you're interested in that, the whole second month is literally immersive. You're on set with storytellers who have done it at the highest levels. I could walk through the guys in Hollywood that have connected with us, or going to be a part of it. I mean, the Spider-Man films. Brent McCorkle was a worship leader here. He's just been a part of 2 recent films that have come out. Just amazing people who are involved. By the end of this thing, you're actually going to create your own project. So on and on I could go. The website's live, enrollment's live. Randy's going to be out in the hallway. So if you're interested, be a part of it, or you know somebody might be interested, let them know. And then pray for us, because it's a pretty big endeavor. Why stories? Why is it that storytelling is so important? Why is it that Jesus became known as a storyteller? Here's the thing about stories. We find our orientation in the world through stories. As a matter of fact, think about growing up. Your frame of reference for understanding life from your earliest childhood was hearing stories. How many of you heard stories about your mom and dad told stories about themselves? Or you heard stories about grandparents. Sometimes the stories in our families are actually not really stories, they're just kind of propaganda, like they're trying to sell or... Your grandfather's really a wonderful person. We tell stories to try and find our way. Our narratives help us make sense of the world. Well, our minds think in story. And you go, well, mine doesn't. I'm an accountant. I like things very sequential. I like perfect order. I mean, I drive for it. It's the way I see the world. Yes, but even in that, there's a story-making component to your brain. It's how we're wired. And the thing that sets Jesus apart is when Jesus tells stories, he tells stories that are lined with redemption that only comes from one place. By the way, it's part of what makes a conversation about Jesus sometimes provocative, because people go, well, how can it just be Jesus? What about other religions? What about other faiths? What is it about Jesus that makes him unique? Well, first of all, a lot of stories are told and there's no redemption. By the way, that's called a tragedy by and large. But you can watch films, you can read books, and you can hear stories where there is really no hope. And people who've been through experiences who find nothing but despair can see the world through that lens. It's just victimization, it's just despair, and there is no hope. Then sometimes a story is created, but the redemption is actually in the wrong place. You don't find redemption in God. You find it in the triumph of the human spirit, or you find it in capitalism, or you find it in socialism, or you find it in some other form of psychology, but you don't actually find it in God. Jesus is telling us stories, and in his day and in our day. These stories they were working in his day, and they're doing the same thing for us. We're retelling the stories that Jesus has told 2,000 years later. Are constantly trying to reshape, reframe our paradigm for living. That's why Jesus uses the term born again. So a very, very smart guy, a guy named Nicodemus, went to Jesus. And he goes, hey, so how exactly do I get saved? How exactly do I enter the kingdom of heaven? And Jesus looked at him and said, well, for you, you got to start all over. You got to be born again. And they give you an idea of how radical that statement was. The really, really smart man in Jerusalem, Nicodemus, goes, like in my mother's womb, like just didn't get it at all. And Jesus going, no, like your entire operating system is off. You have to have an entirely new paradigm for living. And this is actually the universal journey that every single one of us must go on. The truth is we all live by narratives. You have a narrative you live by. Whether you want to acknowledge it or not, conscious or unconscious, you have a narrative you live by. I want to ask you a question off the top. Is your personal narrative empowering you, or is it hindering you? Your frame for living, your understanding for life. Do you feel empowered by it, the way you see the world? Or do you feel stuck? Do you feel like it's a teenager learning to drive a clutch? Like you're just getting thrown around? And by the way, if you go, yeah, well, the truth is I don't feel like my narrative is really working for me, but I think it's a Christian narrative. Well, what exactly do you mean by Christian? Let's remember, Jesus wasn't a Christian. Some of you are like, whoa. Hold on just a second. As a matter of fact, Christian was a term that other people gave to the followers of the way. You use the term Christian, it could mean 100 different things. So many different narratives. So ask yourself the tough question, what is happening with this narrative? In a world full of division and chaos, how are you orienting yourself? Where are you being grounded? How are you learning truth? Jesus guided people to the Father through stories, and each one of his stories reflected universal human need and a path toward human redemption. So let's go into one of Jesus' stories today. If you've grown up in the church or kind of any kind of religious background, I'm sure you're familiar with this story. It's probably being told in different churches this morning because it's just one of those stories that you tell over and over again, but you can't not tell it. If we're in a series called The Storyteller, you have to tell this story. Because I'm not sure, all of Jesus' stories are powerful, but this one's a little bit longer, it's a little bit more involved, and it so captures the human element. It's like watching Les Miserables. I mean, where you just go, like there's so much drama, there's personification in all these different characters. One of my favorite characters in literature is Jean Valjean and Javert, who is the legalist in that story, who can't deal with any kind of grace, right? You have personifications of characters. Literature does that. Jesus is telling a story. I'm about to tell you this story, and there's personifications in characters. What I mean by that is like the kind of the extreme versions of humanity, but we find ourselves in all of them. So this story is sometimes called the loving father. It's sometimes called the legalistic brother, but it's most often called the prodigal son. So here's the story. I'm going to embellish it a little bit just to offer some context, all right? That's all I'm doing. There was a man who had 2 sons. Now, remember, as I've been talking about story crafting, your opening line in any story, you have to build the routine. Here's the normal. There was a man, he had 2 sons. Okay. What has to happen next? If you've been with me a few weeks, there has to be an inciting incident. Something dramatic has to disorient someone's life. Happens pretty quickly. The younger one said to his father, "Father, I hate you. I want to dishonor you. I wish you were dead. I have an inheritance and I want it now." That's essentially, in his culture, that's what this is saying. "Father, give me my share of the estate. And I don't want to wait for you to die. I want it now. Give me my money and I want to tuck and run." So the father took what he was due and he divided the property between his 2 sons. Not long after that, the son got together all that he had. He set off for a distant country. And I remember that phrase. He set off for a distant country and there squandered his wealth in wild living. Now, we don't know exactly what that is. He has an older brother who have made some interpretations about what that is, but we just know that he has not been a steward of what he's been given. He squanders it all. He basically says, "I hate you, I'm off, I'm going to go live on my own, do what I want without any kind of boundaries, rules, anything. I'm living my own life my way." The problem is a famine occurs in the land. Not only does he not have anything, but now there's zero abundance from anyone else. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Jewish culture. This is not a big win for a Jewish man. He longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one had pity on him. No one even took pity. No one gave him anything. When he came to his senses, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants.' So he got up and went to his father." Now, I want you to notice something here. The son has negotiated on the front end, "I want what I'm due," and he's decided he's going to return to the father, and he's negotiating on the back end. Still a form of control. On the front end, you owe me everything. On the back end, you really owe me nothing, so I'll only take the scraps of what you potentially could give me, and that'll be enough now. I want you to think about how we interact with God. My favorite line in all of Scripture is perhaps this one. "But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him and was filled with compassion. Notice the contrast in the verse previously. No one had pity, no one gave him anything. His father, a long way off, saw him and was filled with compassion for his rebellious son. He ran to his son, threw his arms around him, and kissed him. You can't get a lot more dramatic than that. The demonstration of love is described in abundance. The son had rehearsed his speech. He said to the father, I've sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Father, and he interrupted. The father's like, yeah, whatever. Hey, quick, to the servants. Bring the best robe and put him on him. Put a ring on his finger. That's about identification. Remind him who he is. Put sandals on his feet. Bring the fattened calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found, and the celebration began. Now, the story's not over, but before we continue, I want you to imagine just for a second the servants leading him into the party hall and sitting him at the seat of honor at the big table. Maybe they threw the tables together. Maybe it was already set. Don't know. And the father comes in, and here comes the dancing. Up goes the music. Here comes the food. The servants, this is killer. We all got a break from work. Everybody's this immediate party. But it's not unusual. Seems like the father does this a lot. And the father sits next to his son, puts his arm around him at the chair. The son's sitting there, the center of attention. The whole party, feast is happening because of him. And he didn't really deserve this. I mean, what did he do to deserve such love? And imagine him just sitting there dumbfounded, emaciated. The robe's too big for him. The ring barely hangs off his finger. He's got his sandals on. He's looking around like, what? For me? And you can kind of almost sense he doesn't fully get it. He's almost disoriented by love. The story's not over. There's another brother. The older brother heard the news, and he was so excited. I've been waiting. I've been praying for my brother for so long. What an answer to prayer. Where is he? So I can give him a hug. I want to give him some of my money to help him start over again. Verse 28. And the older brother became angry and refused to go in. So his father went out and pleaded with him. But he answered his father, look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Now, just a second, we kind of have a little bit of a picture of the father here. Does he strike you as the type that he needs people to slave for him and he gives nothing but orders? Perception. What do we perceive the father to be like? Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. It's because you don't have any. But when this son of yours, notice it's not even his brother, but when this son of yours, so there's no connection, no recognition of identity. When this son of yours who squandered your property with prostitutes comes home, you kill the fattened calf for him. And the father said, son, you got an attitude problem. Like, are you freaking kidding me? Nope. Consistent father responds to both sons. First he runs after, the second he goes out. And what's his opening two words to the legalist? My son. All that anger, all that rage, you've been trying so hard to earn this yourself. Anytime you wanted to come in from the field, you could have. You're always with me, and everything I have is yours. But regardless of your stuff, we're going to celebrate. We are going to choose joy. Because this brother of yours was dead, and he's alive again. He was lost, and is found. I'm just not sure many of the stories that Jesus tells capture his love like this one. The first book I wrote called Love Well, I take an entire chapter on this story because this chapter means so much to me. And I don't have time. Actually, in the early days, I think, at Journey, I did 3 podcasts back-to-back, 3 messages on each of the 3 characters. There's so much. So I don't have time to go into all that as much as I'd love to. So much here. And I hope the story itself it feels something in the story. It just communicates. I don't even really have to make any commentary. The story would be enough. We could just close here in prayer, think about the story. It's powerful. But I would like to give us highlights, something that happens with all of us, and it's related to our conscious desires and our unconscious desires. And it's revealed in every story. And the way storytellers do it is first with this inciting incident. There's this dynamic incident that happens in the story. The son rebels and leaves home. It radically changes the balance of life. Every story is about working to restore the balance of life. By the way, the stories you tell, this happens intuitively. Maybe one of you come home from work, hey honey, how was work? Work was fine, but on the way home, I was driving down the road in this car, it just started spinning, it careened in the middle of the highway, it was spinning out, it was crazy. Hey, what are we having for dinner? What would your audience say? What happened next? You intuitively are waiting for the story to restore balance. Now, sometimes the story goes off into another rising cycle of tension. Well, the car came to a stop, but then another car came and hit the tail end, and it spun again. And you're just rising levels of tension. Now, by the way, in storytelling, the more you rise, you better have a better payoff if you keep rising those levels of tension. Because if you're like, then what happened? Oh, nothing, I was just kidding, I didn't see a car. That's not a good payoff. What happened? Oh, well, the helicopter came, or you know what, the people got out, they were totally fine. Angie and I were on I-95 when we lived in Florida. We watched a little Toyota go in front of us. This literally happened. Car spinning in front, somebody hits the back of the car, down the highway in front of us. I'm like, he's just in front of us, spinning like this. And the thing comes to a stop. It's completely crunched, but the cab, boy, those Japanese got it down. The cab was totally perfectly fine. And 4 people jumped out. They were totally fine, ran off the highway, and we were like, okay. Totally cool. That was a nice resolve to that story. All right? Storytellers have that. We naturally want to restore the balance of life. Sooner or later, the protagonist begins to struggle to get it back in balance. This happens in all stories. It happens in your story. Your routine is happening, inciting incident. Something disrupts the pattern. What happens? You immediately want to restore the balance. If you'll do the work and you'll go on the journey you're meant to go on, it will actually never be the same. You won't return to that original normal. Angie and I were talking about this the other night. Do you know, so we've been married 26 years, but we've actually been married 4 times. Just to one another. We've had 4 different marriages in one marriage. Why? Because kind of who we were, that died. Something new came out of it. Then who we were in a couple, that died. And something new came out of it. And you know what? Because you're not the same person you were when you got married. There's a change that happens in the dynamic of relationships. They go through seasons of life. I mean, we know this when we watch the seasons of the planet. There's life and death. There's life and death. There's actually a journey that we're meant to go on. And that's part of the story of the prodigal son. Actually, you were born into blindness and you're meant to go on a journey to find yourself. Did you notice the father financed his journey to go live according to his ego? The father wasn't thrown off like, oh no, you can't go. He was like, yeah, this is actually how it works. You're going to have to go find yourself. What's the conscious desire for the boy as he leaves home? His conscious desire is, I want to be separate from my father. What's the unconscious desire? I want to be my own God. We have conscious desires and we have unconscious desires. Robert McKee says the real tragedy of life is that your unconscious desire is getting what it wants out of life. People get what they actually want. There's a software program running in the background. It's your unconscious desire. Again, Angie and I were talking about this in marriage. You have explicit things you explain to one another about expectations, and you have implicit expectations. For instance, you get married, and your first few days together, it's glorious, it's wonderful. You've had sex 15 times, in one day, whatever. I mean, that's what happens when you. And you can't wait, and everything's wonderful. But now life happens, and you go into the bathroom, and you're like, "Hey, could we just talk about some expectations here?" Yeah. Hey, when you spit out that toothpaste, could you do it in the sink? Not on the rim there. It's kind of blue and it's kind of stuck to there. Could you just spit in the sink? Yeah, honey, of course. Sure, I'll start spitting in the sink. Oh, that's nice. So they're explicit, you explained, but they're also implicit. There's some things going on behind the scenes that you haven't talked about. Hey, you talk to that person of the opposite sex? Yeah, I don't ever want you to talk to the other gender ever again. Oh, I didn't know that. Well, I thought it was common sense. Whatever the thing is, stuff comes up and you don't even know. There's this stuff. So you have conscious desires and you have unconscious desires. McKee's making the point that what happens in storytelling, what happens in our own stories, whatever the software program is running in the background is actually what you're getting. So if your frame of reference is that the world is horrible and constantly treating you bad and you're a victim, you will always see the world that way. That will be how you see the world. That's your unconscious desire is going to help you see that. Hey, you want to be your own God? You can be. And you'll live in Gehenna. Jesus calls that hell. You can live in hell, or you can be in the kingdom. He calls that heaven. This is your choice. Every day, see, when you hear this story, you might be like, yeah, the prodigal, I know some people in my life like that. The prodigal's about you and me. Because probably yesterday we had a prodigal thing. Here's what I mean. Just take, money's an easy one here. Jesus talks about money all the time. Your bank account. You talk to a friend, roommate, spouse, girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever. You guys, you have a transaction, some kind of money thing. Hey, money's running out of the account. We got to do something. Here's kingdom. You're in the kingdom, in the rhythms of the kingdom. You're in a state of love. Oh, all right. Not really sure exactly what we're going to do, but I trust God. And I know there's a way out, and if the account runs over and we pay the price, well, that's the consequence for that. If we've made a poor stewardship move, I go, all right, he's compassionate. We're going to have to live with that consequence. We'll make some adjustments. We're going to move forward. I'm going to trust him. He owns it all anyway. I'm just doing this thing. I'm going to confess. I feel some conviction that I didn't really handle that well, so I'll speak that out, repent. Make sure I'm aligned, move forward. State of love. Same question or same statement. Hey, we run out of money in our account. Oh, seriously? Oh my gosh. All right. I'm gonna have to make some phone calls. I don't know what we're gonna do. Did you pay for the thing? What? Oh my. Jeez. Oh my gosh. Not the kingdom. Gehenna. Hell. Fear. In that moment, you separated from God. You went off to the distant land and said, I'm going to be God because he's not trustworthy right now. So I should fix this. And in my shame, I'm not his child. He hates me. I've got to do something to make sure I'm okay with him again because he's the taskmaster. He hates me. And maybe do you see how you flip from the guy who ran off and the guy who's in a field? That fast, it happens in microseconds. We separate. Henry Nouwen says this, every time we deny the spiritual reality that I belong to God, we begin to walk to the distant land. We're just denying the spiritual reality that we belong in his presence. I belong with the ring on, the robe, and the party's for me. And when you have this awareness to it, and you go, oh, God, I just kind of freaked out about the money. I'm so sorry. And God is going, oh, yes, you see it? Come here. Party! Now, I want you to imagine you responding to your conviction of sin like that. Oh, what's going on right now? God loves me so much. We just screwed the money thing bad. I know, but there's a party going on. I'm so loved. Join me. We're loved. We screwed that up. I know. Let's repent together. How would that, if the world starts watching a Christian act like that, how would that reframe the way the world defines Christian? Because that's what it means to be in love. Again, now it says the world's love is and always will be conditional. As long as I go to that distant land, as long as I keep looking for my true self in the world of conditional love, I will remain hooked to the world, stuck in my attachment for someone or something to make me feel better. It is a world that fosters addictions because what it offers cannot satisfy the deepest cravings of my heart. What's his conscious desire when he comes to his senses? I need food. What's the unconscious desire? I want to be loved. I want a place to belong. I'm going to go home. Now, the prodigal does respond like most of us. We come back to God and we go, I know probably this one was really bad that I did, or this is the 50,000th time I've said I'm sorry for this, so I know this time probably you're not ready for me to be your son again. So if I could just I'll tell you what, if you'll just meet this need for our family, I promise I'm going to do my quiet time 5 days in a row. Totally. It's really hard for me to concentrate, but I'll do it. We negotiate because the lie is that somehow we're still doing something to earn his love. Somehow I got to make you see that I'm worthy. And he's just already running up to us while we're talking, hugging us, kissing us, throwing the party. I don't have time to go into it, but the older son is the law. It's the thing that beats us down, that you're never going to be perfect enough. And if again, we do both. Your personality has one, you tend to go one or the other more often. But if you tend to be the legalist and you just tend to really try and earn his love, recognize that the same compassion that exists for the prodigal exists for the one who stayed home. He speaks out his love for the legalist. He doesn't punish either one. Why? Because they're already in their own hell. The boy who stayed home, he's living out hell, trying to earn his way. You feel the anger. He's about to blow up, explode at all times. This is not heaven. This is not love. And the prodigal, he's in the pig pen, starving. He's tried to let everything else satiate his thirst, and none of it worked. But the father doesn't come with punishment. He's going, no, there was punishment enough. So now it's time for the father's love. He loves our questions as much as he loves us, because oftentimes it's the questions that bring us back. He doesn't condemn us. And I'm beginning to believe with all my heart that the primary purpose for being on the planet is what I'm about to say. I really believe with all my heart this is why we're on the planet. He allowed us to be born blind to allow our perceived absence of love to awaken us to the wonder of love. He allowed us to be born blind. He's not thrown off by our blindness, by our obsession with the ego, protecting ourselves, trying to be our own God. He's not thrown off by it. He understands it. He acknowledges it. And he allows our perceived, it's not real, he allows our perceived absence of a love to exist, to be there, to awaken us to the wonder of love. How many of you have said, if my wife just loved me more? You don't understand. My husband doesn't have the tools to love me, and I need him to love me. If my father wasn't who he was, I didn't get the love I needed. My mother was a narcissist. She didn't love me like I wanted her to. My kids don't recognize what I do for them. My friend loved me but then abandoned me. How many times are we speaking out the absence of love, and every time God's going, yes, that was your gift. The absence was there for the opportunity to awaken to the only thing that's real, me. It was there to take you back to the source, to the only divine reality. Yes, my love shows up through people, but always in a broken state because people are broken. I can give you tastes and glimmers through people. It's one of the ways you'll find me and experience me. But I'm so much bigger than a broken human being. And I've displayed it for you in the seasons, in nature, in the stories that surround us. And I've exemplified it in the incarnation of my Son. You were created in love, by love, for love. And the invitation is always extended every second of the day. The Father is going like this. There's a party going on at all times. There's a divine dance happening with the Trinity. Anytime you want to be in, I want you to be here. Love doesn't force itself, so I'm not going to force myself on you. I'm going to invite you. If you need to separate, go spend time with your ego. I get it. I know. That's one of the ways you find me. And when you're ready, and the absence gets big enough to create enough crisis, you'll want to restore the order. Our hearts are restless until they find rest in Him. Will you bow your heads and close your eyes with me? If you're journaling, just please continue. Otherwise, just a moment for reflection. Take a couple of breaths. Feel yourself in your chair. You're here. You're real. You matter. There is no condemnation. Not for the legalism, not for the hedonism, not for any of the mechanisms that we call running away from God. There's no condemnation. John 3:17. I didn't come to the world to condemn the world, but to save the world. You can be in love right smack in the center of it right now. If you'll alter your perception, if your eyes will be open to the great compassionate, persistent, ever-present, scandalous grace of God. Great Creator, Alpha and Omega, beginning, end, eternal, one, our Father. Thank you for love. Help us to find our orientation in the kingdom of heaven. God, in these moments, allow us to be washed in love and to carry it with us into those other 10,000 minutes of our week. When the separation occurs, would you bring us a quick awakening? Would we come to our senses? And would we meet you as you're running toward us? Father, find us today with a heart full of gratitude. In Jesus' name, amen.